Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar, which is looking at some really great insights from CyberEdge's 2020 Cyberthreat Defense Report. So my name's Martin Crew. I'm Director of Industry Solutions at Gigamon, and with me as our special speaker today, we've got Steve Piper, the CEO and founder of CyberEdge. So every year, this is a survey that Gigamon gets involved with. We sponsor this because we really love the research that Steve and his team come up with. It really guides a lot of our thinking through the year, and it really clues us in as to what's important within the customer community around cyber threats, how to defend against them, and best practices in those areas. So I'm going to hand over to Steve in a minute. But you can see Steve's got an extensive background in product and marketing management, focused on the cyber threat area. So he really is an acclaimed expert in this area and a great person for us to have access to for today's webinar. So Steve, with that, I'm going to wrap up my introductory remarks and hand over to you.
Thanks, Martin. I am so excited to be here, and I am so grateful to Gigamon for being a sponsor of our Cyber Threat Defense Report over the years. I am not going to assume that any of our guests today are familiar with this report. So what I'm going to do is talk about the report, and the report is comprehensive. It's close to 60 pages long. We're going to cover maybe, about a third of the topics. And then at the end of the presentation, before we take Q&A, I'm going to tell you how to get a copy of the report and also the infographic. So let's dive into the report. There are many research reports out there in our industry. Most of the reports that you see are about data breaches or cyber threats and trends of cyber threats specifically and how the threats work and that sort of thing. That's not what this report is about. This report is about what enterprises are doing to mitigate the risks of cyber threats. Specifically, in November of last year, and I'm going to say right now, this was pre-COVID-19, we never even heard of coronavirus at this point, last November. That's when the web-based survey took place. And the next slide, I'm going to talk about demographics, but there were 1,200 security professionals from 17 countries and 19 industries that participated. And each respondent is an IT security decision maker or practitioner, and we're talking about 500 plus employees. So we'll get an idea of company sizes in just a moment, but it's a really nice spectrum of small to medium-sized enterprises up through global, multinational corporations. But this report is designed to assess the perceptions of security professionals. We ask them questions like, where was your organization breached? Were you affected by ransomware? We ask about topics of the day, like zero trust and cloud security. And we also ask about what investments they're making. So this survey is designed to assess 4 key areas. And again, we're just going to touch on a few things in each of these 4 areas. Organization security posture, okay, so your ability to mitigate the risks of cyber threats, perceptions of threats and IT security challenges. One of my favorite questions is, what's standing in the way of you being successful as a security professional? Current and future IT security investments. And then lastly, IT security practices and strategies. And so what I want for each of you to accomplish is, as I go through this sampling of statistics from this year's report, I want you to think about how you would answer the question on behalf of your organization. Most of the results that we're going to see in this presentation are global results, but you can download the report and you can benchmark your organization against peers in your country, peers in your industry, and in some cases, peers of your same organization size by employee count. So with regard to demographics, I already mentioned 1,200 respondents, 17 countries, 19 industries, 29% were from the United States. But as you can see in the chart on the left-hand side, we've hit every area of the world in terms of continents. So we have multiple countries in North America, Europe, Asia Pacific. We've also have representation from Africa, the Middle East, and Latin America. So I would say that this is the most geographically comprehensive security study in our industry. With regard to organization size by employee count, nice breakdown not too much weighting in any particular size. So with that, let's jump into the first of the 4 sections. And Martin, I encourage you, if you would like to chime in with any comments or questions, please feel free to do so. But let's talk about current security posture. So one of the questions that we asked straight off the bat is, was your organization victimized by a successful cyber attack in that year? And results, vary just a little bit over the years. And by the way, this is our 7th year of doing this report. A little more than half the questions are anchor questions that we ask year after year. Some of them are topics of the day, but this is a staple. So we have results here for the past 5 reports, and in 2016 it was 76%. So 5 reports later, we're now up to 81%. This is the first time in Cyber Threat Defense Report history that we crossed the 80% mark. So a little bit more than 4 out of 5 organizations were successfully compromised by a cyber attack last year. Now, we know very well that the vast majority of data breaches and cyber attacks are financially motivated, as opposed to hacktivism or nation state threat attacks. So looking at the industries, finance and retail were hardest hit, which I think sort of makes sense. If you are in a Spanish-speaking country like Mexico and Spain, you felt the pain a little bit more than peers in other countries. Australia and Turkey, not as hard hit last year. So IT security's weakest links. So if you think about the different classes of IT assets, and we have a list here, servers, databases, websites, cloud apps, and then down towards the bottom, app containers, industrial control systems, Internet of Things, and lots of classes in between. We asked on a scale of 1 to 5, and you're going to see a few of the charts here based on a 1 to 5. 5 is highest. Okay, so on a scale of 1 to 5, with 5 being highest, rate your organization's overall security posture, meaning your ability to defend against cyber threats for each of these different IT domains. Now, when you see charts that have different colors, red is bad, light blue is either good or maybe not as bad. So static resources, servers, databases, websites, web applications, these things are more static. They're not going anywhere. These things are easier to secure. Now, down at the bottom of the list, many enterprises are embracing application containers with very good reason. But securing app containers is the biggest challenge rated by our respondents, followed up by ICS, industrial control system devices, SCADA devices, PLC devices, things like that, and then Internet of Things. When we hear IoT, typically we think first about our homes. Your thermostat may be connected to the internet, or your nanny cam, or some of your appliances. But in the workplace, even modern copiers have operating systems, certainly voice over IP phones and other devices. So, these things can be a challenge to secure. Another 1 to 5 question, rate the adequacy of your organization's capabilities. So we're talking about people and processes in these different functional areas. On the good news side, at the top in light blue, security engineering architecture, we feel pretty good about that. Incident investigation and response, and identity and access management. These are more mature capabilities. We feel better about those. Detecting rogue insiders and insider attacks remains a challenge, especially when you have so many disparate resources. Security analytics is one of the hottest technologies over the years, and when you have so many different databases, trying to aggregate that information for inspection by common security tools, it's a challenge, and that's especially true with detecting rogue insiders and insider attacks. We're going to see this next one a little bit later. In fact, it might be the next slide, or coming up soon. Security awareness and education. This is a challenge. In too many organizations, we train people when they join the organization and about their shared responsibility for cybersecurity, and then that's it. And then we never train them again. And that's a challenge, and we're going to talk about that a little bit later. Beyond that, application development and testing is another challenge for IT security organizations. One of the critical problems that we've seen over the years is a critical shortage of IT security personnel, skilled personnel. This has ticked up year after year after year. A couple of years ago, 81%, then 84%. This year, 85% of organizations are experiencing a shortfall of skilled IT security personnel, and it continues to be a very significant problem. Okay, next section, perceptions and concerns. So this is a question we've asked from the start. Which types of cyber threats concern you the most? Scale of 1 to 5, 5 being highest. The top 3 here in dark red, these shuffle a little bit year after year, but they're pretty consistently at the top. Malware, phishing, or more importantly, spear phishing, and ransomware. We're going to talk more about ransomware in the next slide, but it's absolutely has not gone anywhere. Of lesser concern are zero-day attacks, attacks against publicly unknown vulnerabilities. Not because they're not serious, they are serious. If you're ever victimized by one, and if you're using traditional signature-based defenses, you're in trouble. The good news here, and perhaps why this is of less concern, is every year less than 1% of vulnerabilities that are registered in the MITRE database, the CVE database, originate as zero-day vulnerabilities. So that's a good news, and likely why that's of less concern.
Hey,
Ransomware. Yeah, please.
hey, just before you move on, right in the middle of the pack there was SSL. What are you actually seeing in terms of trends around SSL adoption?
So this has been something that has been a pet peeve of mine in the security industry for years. And I don't want to steal too much of my thunder because I have a slide on this later. These days, at least a third of perimeter traffic, SSL or really TLS encrypted traffic, less than or about a third of that traffic is decrypted for inspection. And we've got to do better. There are absolutely threats that are embedded ingress, so inbound threats originating from the outside that are emitted within encrypted traffic. And then, once there's a data breach, an advanced targeted attack, advanced persistent threat, whatever term you want to use, and then the bad guy starts exfiltrating data in chunks. I mean, that's always done in encrypted batches and through encrypted means. And, we got to do better as an industry, to combat SSL threats. So, it's a serious problem, those organizations that are affected by it are definitely feeling the pain. Does that make sense? Is that what you were?
It makes perfect sense. And we see the same in our research. So, I mean, we just did a survey. We looked at over, I don't know, probably 100 organizations, and about 80% plus of traffic that they're dealing with is encrypted, but only about a third of it is properly inspected. So I think our stats really correlate with yours there.
Yeah, it's been a pet peeve of mine for I don't even know how many years, and we'll touch on that a little bit later in the presentation. All right, so let's spend a little bit of time here talking about ransomware. Ransomware, it seemed like it went away just a little bit a couple years ago, but it's back stronger than ever. And CyberEdge, we've been tracking ransomware stats for about 4 years now, but after the first year, one of our sponsors said, okay, great, CyberEdge and the Cyber Threat Defense Report, it's great to know the percentage of organizations that have been affected by ransomware. It's cool that we know the percentage of organizations that have paid ransomware. But Steve, are you assuming that paying the ransomware automatically gets your data back? I'm going to admit, yeah, I just kind of assume that because there's no organization, to my knowledge, that really tracked that before CyberEdge in 2018. And this is the first time our report got attracted by or got covered by the Wall Street Journal, and then USA Today and Forbes and every IT security pub, and it's basically annual since. In 2018, we discovered that 49%, if you want to follow the chart here, let me just click pause for a moment. The left side of the chart are the organizations that were affected by ransomware. They were successfully attacked by ransomware. So one or more systems were, typically they're encrypted, and unless you pay the ransom in Bitcoin or some other anonymous currency, kiss that data goodbye. The middle column is, did you pay the ransom? Okay, so in the top, that table is, yes, we paid the ransom. The bottom table in the middle column, nope, we didn't pay the ransom. Now, if we move over to the right side, it says, of those that paid, did you get your data back? Or at the bottom, of those that didn't pay, did you get your data back? So if you look in the table in the very top right, of those that paid, got their data back in 2018, 49%, less than half. And that year, about 40%, only 40% of organizations, 39% were affected. So then you flip a coin after paying the ransom to see if you're going to get your data back. So we got a lot of media attention. The next year, that number ticked up from 49% to 61% of the organizations getting their data back. Okay, good news, right? I mean, if you're going to pay the ransom, we would like for you to get the data back, so that's good. And so that news got out there, and then we saw an uptick in not only in ransomware attacks, but we saw an uptick in ransomware payments. And then in this year's report, 67%, so 2/3 of respondents got their data back. 58% paid the ransom, 62% were attacked. So the big headline here is we have a record of successful ransomware attacks. We have a record of successful, we have a record of ransomware payments, and we have a record of recovered data. So if you think about it, this is kind of a horrible, vicious cycle. So when news gets out that more organizations are recovering their data, that in a way gives you comfort that if you pay the ransom, you're at least now have a 2/3 chance of getting your data back. So with that additional level of comfort, more organizations are paying the ransom. Okay, now what happens when more organizations are paying ransom? That's funding ransomware and the multi-billion-dollar ransomware industry. And Martin, I don't see any end to this. Hopefully, we're seeing advancements in machine learning and artificial intelligence and security analytics and a lot of great security tools. And then certainly, lots of innovations from, Gigamon and other organizations. But I'm not sure, if we keep paying these ransoms, I'm not sure there's any end in sight to the number of ransomware attacks.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, there's no amount of tools can guard against organizations making that decision. And as you say, it's a sort of self-perpetuating cycle. As long as organizations pay the ransom, these level of attacks are going to escalate. Yep.
So it is scary. Okay, next topic here. So this is perhaps my favorite question that we ask every year. Another scale of 1 to 5, question 5 being highest. Rate each of these items in terms of their how they inhibit you from securing your organization. So in other words, to paraphrase, what's standing in the way of your organization's, your IT security team's success? Is it budget? Nope. That's at the bottom of the list. In light blue, lack of budget is never the problem. Okay, and we see security budgets increasing year after year. The top 2 responses, two-way tie, lack of skilled personnel, okay, which we know 85% of organizations are experiencing, low security awareness among employees, okay, that poorly rated IT security function. We're not doing enough to invest in what I call our human firewall. Okay, if you think about defense in depth, and we have perimeter defense and network defenses and host-based defenses and app defenses and data defenses. What about the human defense? Your human firewall, and we need to do much more as an industry to invest in our people. Next topic, current and future investments. Now, please keep in mind, this survey was conducted in November of last year, pre-COVID-19. So, when you hopefully join us a year from now, we're going to see what effect COVID-19 had on budgets. This question right here is actually not a question of, is your budget going up or down, but it's asking what percentage of the overall IT budget, okay, this is people and products, technologies, all in. what percentage of your entire IT budget is dedicated to security? Now, I remember a stat from Gartner. They did a press release, and I wish I could remember whether it was like 10, 12-ish years ago, and they said 5%. Those were the good old days. A couple of years ago, 12.1, last year, 12.5. This year, almost 13% of the overall IT budget is gobbled up by security. And security budgets are continuously rising. Again, these stats are pre-COVID-19, but in 2015, 62% of organizations had rising budgets. In this year's report, 85%. In 2018, the mean budget increase, and this is global, 4.7% increase. That's ticked up to 5% increase this year. It's going to be interesting about COVID-19, and perhaps we'll touch on this later, to see whether IT security budgets are going to be cut because of funding issues, or whether IT security budgets are going to increase because of the work at home movement. So it's going to be interesting to see. In the report, we have 5 tables just like this. We just have time today to touch on one. But we ask our respondents what sorts of technologies are currently in use, which is the column on the left, plan for acquisition in the next 12 months, in the coming year, in the middle, and then no plans at all. This particular table is about network security. You can download the full report to see stats on endpoint security and identity and access management, security management operations, and more. But here we're talking about network security. Advanced malware analysis, sandboxing, over the years has evolved into bleeding edge, and it's evolved into a commodity. So it's baked into so many different solutions. So it is this year's widest currently in use technology. Now, the darker the shade of blue, the bigger the percentage. If you focus in the middle column, plan for acquisition, the hottest network security technology plan for acquisition in 2020 is next-gen firewalls. So bundling together, integrating, I really should say integrating together, your traditional enterprise class firewall, intrusion prevention systems, application control, optional URL filtering, enterprise class solutions, very much in demand. Network behavior analysis and net flow analysis, something I've been a big fan of for years. That a lot of demand for that. And then DLP solutions, monitoring, and this goes back to when we talked about inspecting encrypted traffic from a DLP solutions. I mean, you can invest as much money as you want in DLP if a large portion of your egress traffic is encrypted. It's going to sail right through untouched. So very important. I'm a monster fan of security technologies that embrace machine learning and artificial intelligence technologies. I'd say it's one of the biggest paradigm shifts that we've seen in recent years. It's one of our best chances that we have of gaining the upper hand on cyber threat actors. So we asked if our respondents had a preference for purchasing security products that feature either machine learning and or artificial intelligence technologies. No surprise here, 85% said yes. It's a strong preference or moderate preference, but it is indeed a preference. This is the first year we asked that question. Wouldn't surprise me if we see this tick up. The fourth and final section, before I turn it over to Martin, and if you do have any questions, now would be a great time to submit them. Practices and strategies. I mentioned this as a pet peeve of mine, and I've been a fan of Gigamon for years. Before I started CyberEdge almost 8 years ago, I was at SourceFire, and they were an important partner of ours. And this has been a pet peeve of mine for at least a decade. And I mentioned that only a little more than a third, about if you want to round up, 35% of organizations are decrypting SSL TLS web traffic for inspection by your network security tools. And again, we're talking ingress and egress, not just ingress traffic. Unacceptable, completely unacceptable. We must do a better job as an industry. We must not ignore egress traffic, and we need to work smarter, not harder, not only with our human effort, but also with our investments Okay, so invest in technologies that allow your network security tools to inspect traffic from disparate parts of your organization. So there's so many ways that you can work smarter from an investment standpoint and from a human capital standpoint. Zero trust is one of the big movements this year. Get some encouraging news here. So this is sort of a two-part question. The first part is, what components of your zero trust are you investing in? And now all of these components, they're all in the 40s, from 42 to up to 50%. So email and file encryption, very important. Data discovery, multi-factor authentication, CASBs, user behavior analytics, software-defined microsegmentation, and then microsegmentation using internal firewalls. I'm more of a fan of the software-defined, but whatever gets the job done. But the more promising stat from this question is, we had a couple of responses. So if your organization was not working on a zero trust architecture, we gave you the option of saying, no, we're not working on zero trust architecture, but we plan to implement one. Or no, we're not working on a zero trust architecture, and we have no plans to implement one. So good news here, 2/3 of organizations that haven't started working on a zero trust architecture are planning to commence in 2020. Again, pre-COVID-19, we'll see how that affects budgets, but very promising nonetheless. Okay, a few closing slides, then I'll turn it over to Martin, and we'll address some of your questions. Key takeaways: we continue to face many challenges, as we do every year. Rising successful cyber attacks, we're at record levels. The first time in CDR history, over 7 years, we've seen a crossover the 80% mark. Rising successful ransomware attacks, a record 62% of organizations affected. And then again, it's so hard to even imagine, 58% of organizations paying ransoms. Quick anecdote. Last week or the week before, I did a webinar with a former CISO, and he said his organization set aside $250,000, so $250,000, just set aside in the budget for responding to ransomware, and they took $10,000 of that budget and bought Bitcoin, okay, and just had it sitting in a Bitcoin account, so that if they were affected, they could just respond to that ransomware within minutes or hours, instead of days. So if many organizations are like that, then that helps to explain the 58% mark. Worsening IT security skill shortage, it's getting a little bit worse every single year. We've got to find ways to work smarter rather than working harder, and doing more with the resources that we have. Lack of skilled personnel and awareness among employees, I think we've talked about that. Still not consistently inspecting SSL, TLS perimeter traffic, and detecting rogue insiders and insider attacks continues to be a big challenge. But there is hope. There's hope on the horizon. Rising IT security budgets, okay, again, pre-COVID-19, going up by a global mean of about 5%. I had lunch with a CISO a couple of years ago, and he said, Steve, I'm scared to death to say no to my team, because if we have some data breach or some big high-profile attack, and it could have been prevented by the investment that I said no to, I will lose my job. So it's, we're continuing to see that. Good news for us as security professionals, but I'm not sure how long we're going to be able to sustain this. Confidence in products featuring artificial intelligence and machine learning, 2 thumbs up there. Putting trust in zero trust architecture, seeing a lot of investments, and other promising investments in next-gen firewalls and browser isolation, threat intelligence platforms, security analytics. We saw that rise up over the years in our report to be this year the #1 most widely deployed security management operations technology. So that warms my heart, honestly, that we're making those smart investments. Seeing very promising improvements in API gateways, network and endpoint deception technology is really important, and SOAR continues to soar, no doubt there. So I'll just briefly mention, and Martin, I'll turn it over to you. Please download the full report. As I mentioned, we only had time today to touch on about a third of the topic. So you can see the attachments tab in your interface, and you can access the report in graphics. So Martin, with that, I'm going to just go ahead and turn it over to you.
Hey, so that's great, Steve. So one of my takeaways is I should probably go buy some Bitcoin to get ready for when someone ransomwares me. So, my really big takeaway on this is we're spending as organizations a ton of money on security, on devices, on software, all kinds of things. But the big issue still remains the human element to this. As long as people decide to continue paying ransomware, as long as there are undertrained staff out there, whether they're specialist IT security staff or just end users, this is going to be a problem. And obviously, 85% of organizations, you said, were understaffed in this area. How do you see this evolving? Is this something we're ever going to get our arms around?
I think there's ways that we can think creatively, think a little bit outside the box. A new platinum sponsor this year, and again, we're so grateful for Gigamon being, one of our returning platinum sponsors. But I'm a CISSP. I've been a big fan of ISC Squared for years, and I'm just so glad that they joined as a sponsor this year. And we added, a couple of questions related to training and certification, and this got me sort of thinking outside the box. So, in a couple different ways. First, perhaps we can use training and certification, especially the certification part, which, by the way, if you read the report, we asked the motivation for achieving certification. One of the responses was financial motivation, like you'll make more money because of it. Surprisingly, bottom of the list. That was the last option on the list. It's not about the Benjamins. It's about getting the training and the certification you need to be more successful in your job, but also one of the responses was basically, I'm paraphrasing, getting some street cred, but from your peers. But back to your question, if organizations use that as an enticement, hey, join our company, and after you're here for 6 months, I'm making this up, after you're here for 6 months, we're going to enroll you in CISSP or whatever training, and as long as you pass the test, and I don't know, then we'll pay for it, and then you have to stay here 2 years, whatever. So it could be a recruiting and a retaining tool. The other outside of the box thought that I had was perhaps look at the talented people outside of security, perhaps in network operations, or heck, maybe even your help desk, some young kids that very bright, that have a lot of promise, and you could train them and certify them and have them transfer over to security as a great way to increase your sort of the homegrown method, because it's probably a lot easier to hire help desk people than it is skilled IT security professionals.
Yeah, I'd strongly agree with that. It's much easier to cross-train internal people. They already know the organization. They know a lot of the procedures. Grafting on the knowledge that they need of the security side of things is probably a much better way to go than trying to bring people in from outside. So that's an interesting response. And it's good that you called out ISSC. We do a lot of work with them as well. And we certainly see a huge amount of interest in the joint webinars that we do with them.
Great.
So, you've been doing this a long time, and I want to ask you, what's the most surprising thing in all of the research that you've done over the last year in this area?
So, 2 years ago, and both of the most surprising stats, I would say, relate to ransomware. So 2 years ago, when we first posed the question, okay, you paid the ransom, did you get your data back? 49% in our 2018 CDR, the Cyberthreat Defense Report, 49% got their data back. Shocking to me. That's bad for business, okay, from the threat actor's point of view. Whether they're just trying to get more money out of the victim, which, if you're going to come back for more money, you're not going to, you'd have to be an idiot to keep paying and paying and paying, thinking that you're going to get your data back eventually. So I don't think that's the motivation. I think it was more or less laziness, the with them, what's in it for me? Okay, I got the $600 in Bitcoin, why should I go out of my way to restore the data? I'll just, forget about them. So that was shocking a couple years ago. But seeing that tick up from 49% to 67%, okay, that's the good news. But the most shocking thing from this year's report, 58% of organizations, paying ransoms. I'm still floored by that, so that's, I'd say, the biggest stat from this year's report. That's the biggest surprise to me.
So a follow-up to that one. So did you see that being across the board, or are there industries that are more prone to ransomware and more prone to paying ransomware?
Yeah, so I'm gonna look off to my screen off to the side of me. I got 3 screens here today. I mentioned earlier, and I think we have a general sense of this. Most cyber attacks and data breaches are financially motivated. So the industries that were most prone to pay the ransom, those included, let me scroll over here just a little bit. So the top 3 industries, telecom and technology, followed by finance, and beyond that, manufacturing. Government was least likely. And I want to be clear, this is a global study, 17 countries, so government does not mean US Fed. Certainly I'm sure there were Fed responses, but this is federal, state, and local across 17 countries. So it's kind of good that, taxpayer dollars aren't being used to fund the ransomware industries, but it makes sense that telecom and technology, finance, and manufacturing are the 3 likeliest industries to pay ransoms.
Yeah, interesting. So, mapping some of your findings to some of the investments that we've been making in product, it's interesting to see that containers and container security is one of the vulnerabilities. Actually, I think it was the top vulnerability that you identified in terms of new technology. We're seeing with the response to COVID, a lot of organizations starting to move from legacy systems to cloud-based systems and using containers for scale out. So do you think it's likely there's going to be even more issues as a result of that?
More issues on the app container security side, or more issues from which perspective?
Security, yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if there's going to be any more or less issues. I'm so glad to see so many investments made in RASP and DIAST and all these security testing tools, and and organizations unifying them into one platform. That's a nice trend, so you don't have to go to different vendors to get different pieces. And that is one of the biggest challenges, because this is emergent technology. So enterprises are starting to realize the benefits of DevOps and security working together in the DevSecOps mentality. So that's just fantastic trend in the last, I'd say, 4 to 5 years. I don't know that COVID-19 is going to affect that one way or the other. I can't. I certainly see COVID-19, going to increase organizations' attack surfaces. Okay, so if you think of an attack surface for an organization, typically it's the managed devices that they're using, and road warriors, roving salespeople, they have their managed laptops. But people working at home are starting to use home computers, and that expands your attack surface. Organizations or people not patching quickly enough, correcting those vulnerabilities. So I think we're going to see an uptick in terms of data breaches resulting from COVID-19. I think we're going to see a lot more investments in supporting remote workers and helping to turn unmanaged devices into semi-managed devices. And so I think we are going to see a lot of interesting new investments because of COVID-19.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And I think it's really important to stress this issue of the closer that NetOps, SecOps, and DevOps can work together, the better the chance of closing the loop and really securing the network, particularly at the enterprise level. So, it's ironic, isn't it, that just as people are the greatest weakness on the network, so people are actually the greatest hope in resolving a lot of these issues.
That's right.
So, Steve, I want to say thank you. As ever, the clock is not our friend. We're up against needing to close this webinar out. Steve already shared ways that you can access the CyberEdge report. So I just want to share my screen and give people who are listening a couple of other resources. So in the attachments tabs, you can get the report from us, from Steve, whichever works. And we've also got a lot of other resources that are available to you there around the issue of securing the enterprise. And if you're interested in Gigamon and want to see how our visibility and analytics fabric weaves together all of these different tools and elements that make up effective security, you can request a demonstration from us. One other thing that I would absolutely like to highlight is we have a very active community of users, and in that community they share a lot of tips, a lot of concerns around security best practices. So please, you do not have to be a Gigamon customer to access the community and to tap into this fantastic resource. So please, take the opportunity, go to the website, click in, join the community, and join the conversation. Let's all get better together. So that's it. So again, Steve, thanks so much. Look forward to doing this same time next year, if that's all right with you.
That sounds great to me, and I do want to say how grateful I am to Gigamon, not only for your financial investment in helping to make this report possible, but also your intellectual investment. Our sponsors, and especially Gigamon, the brain power that you guys bring to this report in terms of the content of our survey and the analysis, it's just very much appreciated. You guys help to make this report better year after year.
You're very welcome. This makes us all better. We're very happy to do it. So with that, thanks again, Steve. I'm going to wrap up, and thank you everybody for joining us and for listening today. Goodbye.